Initializing Enduring Play Podcast Season 1 engine. Decompressing audio. Synchronizing waveforms. Reticulating splines. Launching Podcast Lobby. Welcome back to Enduring Play, the podcast where we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive. I'm your host, Cheryl Platts, video game designer, director, and author of the Game Development Strategy Guide from Rosenfeld Media. In this first season of the Enduring Play podcast, we focus on going deep with some of the folks who were interviewed for my book and get the full story. In today's episode, we have the honor of speaking with Eric Kabisch, who has a storied career helping start the design craft at Scopely, one of Time's 100 most influential companies, who is also VP of Design at Roblox, who was head of UX design for Stadia at Google, and was recently the Vice President of Design at VRChat. A few weeks before the podcast went to air, Eric shifted gears to focus on strategic advisory work, board service, and supporting companies at the intersection of design, games, and emerging technology. While we interviewed, he was still at VRChat, but everything we talked about is still deeply relevant, and I can't wait to share his perspectives with you. The beauty of today's conversation is you don't need to be a user experience designer or game designer to benefit from these wide-ranging insights on how to lead creative teams effectively. And everyone will benefit from Eric's unique experience building worlds based on user-generated content. Let's get into the game. Player 1, Cheryl Platts. Player 2, Eric Kabisch. Podcast level, start. Welcome back to Enduring Play, and if you have ever wondered what it takes to design for user-generated content experiences in the video game world, Eric Kabisch is the person you need to hear from, and I'm so glad to have him here today. Eric, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's great to be here with you.
While I did a little bit of an intro coming into the podcast, I would love it if you could introduce yourself to our listeners as well, because no one knows your background better than you, and yours is especially interesting.
Sure. Let's see. I might just pick some random stuff too. So
Go for it.
Yeah. No, I'm Eric Kabisch. It's great to be here today. I currently am at VRChat, which is a social VR company and platform for user-generated content. And I serve there as their vice president of design. And so in that capacity, I oversee product design, user research, brand, and the 3D art focus. And so that's really fun. I guess I've been doing video games for a long time and other forms of sort of interactive entertainment for the last, I won't date myself. But
we don't have, dates don't have no meaning here.
Let's just say for a long time.
Podcast level, paused. Begin host commentary. As you listen to Eric describe the wide variety of experiences that led him to his role at VRChat, I hope that people who are currently struggling with what to do next in the video game industry will take heart. You don't always need a straight line in the video game industry. My path was not straight. I spent many years away from the video game industry, and Eric's story is similar. He went to academia, started in music, and his path brought him to games and has now sort of brought him to something that transcends games. So in this moment, when the video game industry, for many of us in it, seems like it is contracting, listen to the stories of those of us who have walked back and forth between video games and the wide world beyond. Taking a step beyond doesn't mean you have to leave forever. In many cases, it just means you come back stronger. It doesn't diminish what you're going through, but it doesn't mean it's a one-way door.
Kind of had three chapters. Like I started out doing digital design, or I started in music, but I shifted into digital design. I did take a mid-career hiatus to go back to academia for a while, and I started as a Master of Fine Arts, and then I ended up in a PhD program. I got a doctorate in computer science, and then I ventured back out into the professional world where I've been doing design. I started in that third chapter. I started at Scopely and kind of helped. I joined that founding team and helped set up the design and research function there for about 6 years. I went over to Google and I got the chance to support a design team to take Google Stadia, their cloud gaming platform, to market from R&D and all the way through out into people's hands and living rooms. And then I went to Roblox during their kind of public listing and rapid growth phase over the pandemic, and served as VP of design there too. And I was there for 3 years. And now I've joined the team at VRChat, and I'm really excited to kind of help shepherd the UGC community of social VR.
Launching narrative cutscene, user-generated content. The term UGC that you just heard stands for user-generated content. Technically, UGC is a very broad term, and it can be applied to almost anything, as long as that content is created by people who weren't involved in the actual creation of the game or app. Doesn't have to be a game. Fan art, posts on social media, Twitch streams, things like that. UGC-driven games are games where players can create, edit, and share their own content within the construct of the video game for other players to experience. The content they're sharing might be maps, it might be in-game items, it might be characters, it might be story, it might be an entire gameplay mode. During my time working on The Sims and The Sims 2, user-generated content was actually a big part of even that early ecosystem. While Sims fans couldn't use our internal tool, Edith, there were tools like Homecrafter and Facelift, which were tools for creating custom walls and floors and custom sim heads. And there were also tools that the community created, like the Transmogrifier, which cloned existing objects and modified their properties. And this was in the era of Sims 1. Like, today's UGC platforms are on a whole other level. They are often nearly fully featured development environments where you can create interactive worlds that other players can interact. And so the people creating UGC-powered platforms have all the challenges of creating a sustainable and interactive game loop in many cases for a UGC-powered game, but also all the challenges of creating a sustainable development environment, and often all of the challenges of creating an economy. And don't forget the challenge of protecting players, especially kids, from each other, which is why today's conversation with Eric is so fascinating. Eric, our guest today, served as Vice President of Design for Roblox, which is one of the largest user-generated content platforms in the video gaming world, and now serves as Vice President of Design for VRChat, which is a user-generated content-powered platform, which is a little bit more than games. It's broader, but is very adjacent to games. Loading. Podcast Level 1. The role of design in multidisciplinary game development. What a phenomenal background. And the multidisciplinary part resonates so much, like the fine arts and computer science and all of that. What drew you to sort of settle into design after exploring all those different disciplines?
It's the best discipline. I don't know. I think design is interesting because I think really empowered designers and design thinkers understand engineering, they understand business strategy, they understand kind of the comprehensive pieces, because I think the power of design and the big picture of design is really connecting dots and understanding the constraints and opportunities and business context of what you're doing. So I think, to me, it's that magical way of connecting people, both internally, connecting people that you work with and that you're collaborating with, and then connecting sort of the business vision with what humans out there in the world actually need is the most exciting part of the process to me.
I'm so glad you brought up the business vision part of it, because that's one thing that I've observed sometimes gets missed when we talk about design as a practice out in the industry. Is we talk about tools, we talk about Figma, but that business sensibility is so critical, and almost more so in games than in other areas where working on server software, where it's kind of a known quantity. Loading. Podcast Level 2. Curiosity as a strategic tool. And you've worked on so many unknown product releases like Roblox and Stadia. How did you develop that sense of strategic alignment, of business awareness as a budding designer through your gaming career?
It's a great question. I guess I don't really know. I guess curiosity, right? Like I encourage everyone just to stay curious and like look, one of the big things in that role of connecting people and connecting the dots, understanding holistically how an ecosystem comes together is to listen to the people that you're working with. So I think I've learned from great business leaders, great product leaders, great engineering leaders, strategists. And I think that's the way I've learned. I'd love to say I went out and got an MBA. Well, actually, no, I wouldn't love to say that, but that may be a way that you could understand the business side. But I think I've learned it on my own. I was an entrepreneur earlier in my career, and I did learn a little bit that way. But I think a lot of it's through applied learning and curiosity and listening to the people that you're working with and what they're trying to accomplish.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. I need to take a moment here to emphasize what Eric is saying. And I know that this advice might land as disingenuous. What do you mean a VP is telling me that all I need to do is be curious to learn how to apply strategy? But, I am in the senior leadership phase of my career. And the number one thing I tell my teams over and over again at multiple companies is lead with curiosity. So it resonated so much with me when Eric said this, because you can come with book knowledge, you can come with training, but in the end, strategy is about how to adapt to what's about to come next. It's a fixed mindset isn't going to help. You need to listen to the people around you. You need to adapt to the conditions that are happening. And so leading with curiosity is the best quality a strategic leader can have. And adapting it, and learning the humility that you're stronger together with the people around you than you are alone is what makes truly great leaders great. That's such great advice. And also very like growth mindset and hopeful for folks that if they didn't necessarily have access to a big MBA, it's not like they don't have hope. It just means they have to value the time they spend with other folks. And that's something I've struggled with the people I manage sometimes too, where they don't value those connections with other folks. Have you seen that on your teams?
Look, there's a lot of pressure in developing interactive software, right? I mean, there's a lot of pressure probably in anyone's job, but I think the pressures that fall on a designer is often like being that sort of, design is blocking. We always hear design is blocking, and, an aside that design blocking typically means like there's a bunch of requirements that are really fuzzy and tricky and that could be like wrapped up in legal challenges or decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, and the other thing people often don't realize is that the nature of design puts it at the front of the creative process, which means that often you've got art and production and engineering and quality assurance all kind of waiting on design, which leads to this blocking perception. But that doesn't mean we should always rush design, because it means we might skip the goodness of the process.
Design is often at that spot where it becomes highly critical and highly visible that they're doing their work in order to enable other people to do their work, right? And so that often creates like, I just got to get the pixels out. I got to do the thing. I got to, make decisions here. And I think that's where I love to encourage, people that I talk to or support in various ways to ask the why questions, and it doesn't have to slow things down. Sometimes you do maybe need to like slow things down, but just like, hey, why are we doing that thing? Where there could be one path that you take that's just an assumption that you need to go do this thing that you're being asked for. And there's another one where you can kind of start to understand the why and understand like, why are people making these decisions? And you may end up finding either that you learn a lot or that there's a conversation to be had and you have a point of view that can help people work through the whys.
Thank you. Yeah, all of that resonates so much. Loading. Podcast level 3. Low ego, high collaboration, high alignment environments. You've worked on a variety of teams. Is there anything, in your opinion, that the successful teams had in common, or many of the successful teams had in common?
I may end up sounding like a broken record, but I do think teams that kind of put their ego aside create that safe space where you can ask the why, where you can bend a little bit outside of the expected norms of questions that you might want to ask, and where it really feels like people are trying to understand each other's points of view. So I think low ego, high collaboration, high alignment on a vision, right? And I think that's where leaders can be really helpful and successful is making sure that there's clarity of alignment around mission, the vision. What are the principles that you want people to apply to decision making? And I think that really helps teams to kind of make sure they're listening, get beyond the ego parts of the things that you're holding on to. And I think then the outcome, the other side of that is you have to be able to disagree and commit. You have to be able to listen. You have to be able to be in a safe space where you're sharing your point of view. But ultimately, you also have to be prepared to commit to a direction, commit to a vision, and have a team that can align around that. And I think really so that sort of, it's kind of cliche, but the psychological safety and the low ego and the commitment to alignment, I think, is probably one of the greatest predictors of success of teams.
I don't think that's a cliche or a broken record. And I feel like sometimes when people look at the games industry from outside, there's this misconception of an auteur environment, or there's this one person who's just telling everybody what to do and everybody just does it. But you're not the only person I've spoken to who talks about the importance of this safety, the fun, the collaboration. And that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah. If you're not having fun, how do you expect the people who are enjoying your product to have fun, right?
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. As we wrap up this level of conversation, I want to draw special emphasis to the point you just heard Eric make about those low ego, high alignment teams. When people think about creative leaders, about vice presidents of design and creative directors, I think outside the industry, there's this perception that it's all about ideas, that it's all about being the smartest person in the room. But over and over and over again, when talking to leaders like Eric, and in my own experience, the differentiator behind the best games, the most successful teams, is not a leader who has the best ideas, but a leader who leads with the kind of curiosity Eric is describing here. So if you leave with nothing else from this podcast, internalize that spirit of why, that spirit of curiosity, of wondering what else is going on in the team, what other perspectives are there, how you can be better together. That is what leads to the psychological safety that brings the best creativity out of video game development teams. Why does why matter? When you're 2 years into a game and senior leadership comes to you and says, well, we need to reboot everything. We need to give the unicorns lasers. If you've built a team with the right level of curiosity, you might just prevent disaster. You might create an environment where someone comes up and says, hey, what problem were you trying to solve there? Did you feel like it wasn't powerful enough? Because unicorns aren't really about lasers, but maybe we could give them a double jump. And that's a fictional example, but I've definitely been in situations like that on game teams. As a leader, don't you want to empower your team to help you prevent disaster? Loading podcast level 4, the harsh truth about video game careers. What's one thing you wish you knew when you were starting out in the games industry? A lot of folks who are listening are probably aspirants or career switchers.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, some of the things we're talking about, I think, are really important. I think it can be a difficult industry, right? So I think having your eyes wide open, especially currently with all the dynamics that are happening in the industry, right? There's a sea change happening underneath us. I think that's been a continual process, but I think there's some really interest changes that are happening now. So I guess like being real down to earth that it is a job, right? Like it is in interest of developing and gifting people with experiences that are joyous and some of the most deeply passionate. We are custodians often to some of the most deeply passionate communities of users of any sort of software products out there, and that can be really enriching, and it can be really stressful, and it can really if your head is not in the right place and you're not listening to feedback in a way that is kind of distancing yourself as the shepherd of that experience from what you're hearing. I think it can be really trying. So I would just like make sure that you're talking to people, understanding the industry, understanding the pros and the cons.
So if your passion is games, what is the alternative?
There's a I forget I don't know. I was reading this recently. I've encountered this too. I started in music, like I said, and I made the decision to and I love games too, so it's kind of cool. But like my primary passion was music, and I had a recording studio. I was making that my living for a bit, and I stepped back at one point, and I was like, it was so much my job that I didn't enjoy making music anymore, right? And I think there are people who say, hey, it's not always the best to try to make money off of your passion. Sometimes you make money off something else so that you can support your passion, right? So I just think like really doing that deep dive on how it's going to be, how it maps to what you really want to spend your days doing, not only this vision of like creating games,
I it resonates so much. When I started doing games, I didn't realize how little time I would have to play games. And then but you need to play the games because you need to know what's going on in the market. And then it's like, oh, I got to play this game in the 5 minutes I have. And that doesn't create a joyful experience.
And playing games with an analytical mindset is not always as fun as playing games just like with with whatever mindset you might be bringing to that type of game, right? It does change the way you view games in a lot of ways, right?
Loading. Podcast level 5. Designers as custodians of emergent gameplay. When you were talking about what you wish you had kind of known or what people should know coming into the industry, I loved your use of the word custodian. Because you've worked on some of the biggest user-generated content gaming experiences out there. And my impression as an outsider is like how I can only imagine how unpredictable it is to work in those spaces. And I'd love to click on that more, but I'm so glad you used that term because I think sometimes people think that they have control, but a lot of times when we ship games, we have an idea of how people will use it, but you have to make a choice. Do you stick to that idea or do you meet people where they are?
So, I mean, like I want to hit the plus like 10 million button on that comment. Yeah, it's a challenge. I think it's especially a challenge for designers, honestly, because I think there are certainly designers come from all backgrounds, right? But like there is an ivory tower school of design, right? And I think there is an element of craft and there is an element of finesse and detail. And there's some types of design that you can't do through committee. And it does take an artist and the auteur, like you said, there's like part of that is like really baked into the DNA of design. But I think games in general, and especially like through my career, moving from, more like creation of games content into platforms, into UGC, into tooling, it's become more and more the case that, and again, I think even just like creating a game, like you don't know how people are going to use it. And sometimes it's actually the most interesting thing is like sitting in a play test, watching people use something that you've designed and totally like breaking it in a way that you never could have imagined in your wildest dreams they would break this thing. And sometimes it breaks in a bad way, and sometimes it breaks in a really magical way. and like having the ability to like reincorporate that into your process, or just understand as you're approaching a system that that system might be bent in ways that you never imagined it. I mean, I think that's the beauty, but that can be something that people don't expect, or you know, again, it depends on, you have to have an open mind for how you take those learnings in and incorporate them versus like, you know, throwing your laptop on the ground or whatever.
Can you talk a little about what it's like to encounter the unexpected when you're building these platforms that allow players to build whatever they want?
This becomes an expectation, right? As you're building a UGC platform, right? I think because I think there are probably examples that come out of just like what you wouldn't consider to be a UGC example, right? In terms of people just like reappropriating the systems that you made. But for UGC, like that is part of the design process, right? Is like sometimes you're not actually, or most of the time, you're not actually designing the end content. You're designing possibilities, the systems that create the possibilities that other UGC creators will craft an artifact or an experience for, that then their users are going to reappropriate. And sometimes they're building things that also allow for creation and craft and creation of mechanics by their users who have other users, right? This is the thing that like, and this is the way, if you really want to help a designer move from the ivory tower auteur to understanding emergence and emergent systems as a concrete thing, like throw them into designing for UGC creators. And it's so, again, depending how you take it, it can range anywhere from frustrating as all get out to like the most amazing kind of creation act that you could do, which is empowering others. Yeah.
So beautifully said. Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary. Chapter 9 of the Game Development Strategy Guide is called From Emergence to Pro-Social Gaming. And this concept of emergence is front and center. Game developers typically flag emergent gameplay as gameplay that deviates from or exceeds the parameters originally planned, predicted, or implemented for a game of any form. Some types of games, like simulation games and open worlds, allow for open-ended gameplay, and that's particularly true of games that support user-generated content. And just as players seek mastery within your game, some players are going to see an opportunity to seek mastery over your game by finding new ways to play, which might conflict with your concept of fair play. Other players might seek not to pursue self-expression through the purchase of cosmetics, but through the modification of your game's code itself. The concept of emergence in games is inspired by the concept of emergent behavior in nature. Dr. Evelyn Fox Keller and Dr. Lee Sagel broke the world of mathematical biology open in 1969 with a paper that first demonstrated how slime molds display emergent locomotive behavior by following each other's pheromones. To an outside observer, what starts out as chaotic starts to evolve into this weird sort of logical beauty as the slime molds follow each other's scent across the forest floor. And for game designers who have truly embraced emergence, what starts out looking like players chaotically abusing a game can turn into the most beautiful uses of a game that exceed your expectations. Loading. Podcast level 6. Modeling successful design leadership across an organization. So you're a leader of design teams. How do you approach setting your UX teams up for success in this really often matrixed environment of video gaming?
Yeah. So some of the things we've touched on, right, are some of the things that I just try to help people understand. I think I'll go back to, I've been blessed to sort of get to this point where I am in my career, where my primary goals are to the team, right? And to create that safe space, not create it, but to try to enable practices and to encourage behaviors, both within the team that I'm shepherding and within adjacent teams of collaborators that enable that safe space and sharing of ideas, right? The other part of that, of the design team stewardship piece, is creating practices and processes that allow for that, right? It's helping other people understand the multiple ways that design and design thinking and design approaches and the types of people who become designers can solve problems outside the realm of what they conceive that design might be solving, like big picture business problems, organizational problems, right? Like all of these opportunities. Sorry, I don't like to call everything a problem. Sometimes it's like identifying an opportunity that exists within a group of humans that are processes of observation and deconstruction and mapping like help solve, right?
I love that you're bringing up the broader applicability of design in general, not just UX, not just game design, but how the skill set that designers have can apply to an entire business, an entire game studio. 100%.
That's another piece, sort of like stewardship of the team, of course, providing opportunities to upskill, et cetera, but also providing them context for the rest of the company. And I think that's a way that you apply that approach to the team. But the other thing that you need to do as a design leader is at problem and opportunity spaces that are at the company level or on the long-term horizon out beyond the roadmaps, demonstrating those kinds of behaviors and solving company level problems, right? Those could be, HR challenges, those could be business challenges, those could be operational challenges. And I think applying at the highest order of the company, the design approach to problems helps demonstrate that for everyone. And I think also really making sure that the vision and mission of the company is contextualized within a very human-centric lens that can sort of also cascade down, and just helping the team understand how the work that they're doing on a daily basis can be contextualized as part of the company's, is driving the company forward, and also as a path for them to aspire to what they could do one day with their career.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so helpful to kind of hear how you structure this in your head and approach your role as part of senior leadership. I sometimes reflect on why this pattern showed up early in my career. Like, why is it that design keeps solving these organizational challenges? And as you describe it, I think I wonder if you feel the same way. It's design, whether it's game design or user experience design or whatever. It's so often about context. And once you learn how to take in context, you mentioned the importance of listening at the very beginning of this. Once you develop that skill, it just applies everywhere. And then suddenly you can start applying that pattern outside of the core.
I agree. Can I add one thing to that too?
Please.
I have another theory that's a little more maybe cynical. I don't know if it's cynical or not. You tell me. But it's also true that, like, we all know this design maturity challenge, whatever, blah, 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 seat at the table, right? I think there are cases when design is misunderstood or underrepresented, and so there's also this deep hunger for sometimes those organizational challenges might be seen by people or disciplines that maybe are less understood too. So I think that's another thing, like, it's the skill set, and it's also like the level of awareness that unfortunately like design teams are often put in.
Yeah. If people don't understand your craft, if you can go and solve a problem for someone else, you help spread the awareness and share the love.
Loading. Podcast Level 7. Audio design for video games and virtual reality.
You mentioned a passion for audio. And I think for people coming from traditional software, audio is one of the more misunderstood parts of game design. And I wonder if you had any thoughts about like the role of audio in games today, especially in virtual reality, how it's shaking out for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so key, right? Like, ask somebody to remember a book that they read a few years ago, and it'll be like broad sweeping, or they'll totally like misremember it or whatever. But like, we all have it deep in our archives. I can't even believe the volume of lyrics that I have in my head, right? And so there's something like deeply visceral about connection to music that I think transcends games and is just kind of part of what we do. So it's very key. It's been interesting. Yeah, like, so I think what platform that things are like, because you asked specifically about VR, the platform the platform to me makes a real difference on how forward attention to whether it's sound effects or music or other types of audio experience are thought about. So like, unfortunately, most people have their sound muted when they're on a mobile game, right? And so if you're producing mobile games, I think it's still equally as important, but it just is not often, it's not always as central to the experience. And then, sort of obviously TV experience, PC, probably audio becomes mostly much more important. But in VR, like you largely are so fully immersed that it is your main audio channel, and so I think it becomes really important. It becomes part of how you do sense making within this spatial environment, and everything that contributes is just like a level more visceral because you're fully sort of taken out of the physical surrounding in a way that you aren't on other platforms. So yeah, I think it becomes extremely important and also just a great tool for how you can elicit emotion or suspense or, all these sort of feelings.
I love the sense making piece. People obviously think of like, oh, of course games have music, or oh, there's a little sound effect here or there. But that subconscious layer of processing is a whole other level, especially when you're in these virtual spaces and kind of hitting cognitive processes that get to like how we process physical space.
Yeah, I mean, you get like, let's solve it through the UI. Let's solve like how are we going to get people to make these connections? And it's right. Like maybe the answer is there's a little something you can do with the audio to trigger that attention over here, especially when you've got spatialized audio. Like, oh, the thing's over there, or whatever. I think like we all can just look to Wagner for the leitmotif, right? Like you get these thematics that come, and all of a sudden, like if you've got this thematic, it's like, oh, the bad guy's coming, like this is the Darth Vader theme for sure, is what my little one tells me, So yeah, it's I think thinking about it in a way of sense making or just like part of the UX is really a powerful tool.
Loading. Podcast level 8. The new product mindset. From 0 to 1.
You've had a couple of different experiences with regard to like company maturity and company strategy. You've worked on companies that have been around for a decade, and then you mentioned Scopely, where it was kind of earlier and you were spinning things up, and you mentioned Gadia, which was a new product line within a company. Can you talk about kind of the difference between doing design for new product versus heavily mature product?
Yeah, super interesting question. I mean, I guess if I were to distill it down to its simplest level, when you're doing 0 to 1, or when you're trying to find a new mechanic, it's really, I mean, it's the focus is on PMF, product market fit, right? You're trying to figure out, does this mechanic resonate either with anybody, or with the specific target that we've identified, whether that's like fans of an IP or whatever. And so there's like really this exploration mindset, right, of trial and error, of iteration. Let's face it too, looking at other things, right? Like we all love to imagine we're inventing things from scratch, but we're inventing things within a context of tried and true mechanics largely. And when you innovate, you're probably innovating on the back of something else, right? And so there's this real like explorer mindset that can be really exciting, but can be really like this, back to the career choice thing. Like it can be really hard if you're not finding that fit, So I think it entails a specific kind of work, a specific type of person, a specific type of mindset, a specific type of flexibility around the process that you design, to find the right solutions.
Podcast level paused. Begin host commentary.
Well, we joked earlier about not needing an MBA to do strategic work in video games. And full disclosure, this is not to say that I think MBAs are meaningless. I literally teach an MBA class for Carnegie Mellon on the craft of making video games. My class, What Makes Us Play, for the Masters of Entertainment Industry Management program, is what inspired this podcast and my book. But that doesn't mean that you can't self-educate on many of the concepts that MBAs require. And product market fit is one of those. Product market fit, or PMF, is a term that refers to a tipping point when the product meets the needs of people so well that they start telling other people about it, and it starts becoming a virtuous cycle. This concept was created by Andy Rachleff, CEO of Wealthfront, and it seems really simple, but it's very easy for someone to just come up with an idea and not really look to see whether or not there's enough people who need that idea, that game, that concept, before spending a ton of money to build it.
Loading. Podcast level 9. Evolving. Thriving evergreen games.
And then if we go like to the polar end, and so, and even at Scopely did a great job building these like evergreen titles. There's some of the stuff that we shipped early in my tenure there that is still like going. And so one of the things that they and others have figured out is this sort of approach towards evergreen systems, which it's great if you can think about that early when you're doing 0 to 1, like what are those systems going to be? But it also sometimes is premature, right? Because you don't know exactly where the fit is going to happen and what mechanic is going to latch on. But I think as you get deeper and it's like, okay, we've got a mechanic, we've got a core user base. There's different ways you can evolve. You can try to evolve to new audiences. You can try to continue to grow it, maybe if it's something that is available, but you really also start to think about how you're serving the people that are already there in the communities and how do you help them build communities, how do you build evergreen systems so you don't have to just continue churning out content, which becomes expensive and less effective over time. So I think they're really different types of approaches from when you're trying to get something off the ground and find a fit to where you're building evergreen systems, social dynamics, UGC, right? Where people are actually building the content for you.
Launching. Narrative cutscene. Scopely. Background information.
Let's talk about Scopely for a second. First of all, full disclosure, I'm very proud of the short but meaningful time I spent at Scopely in 2024 as the Director of Experience Design, leading a team of user experience designers and user interface artists. I was working on Marvel Strike Force at the time, and I left earlier than I expected due to receiving the opportunity of a lifetime. Eric brings up Scopely a number of times during our interview. This podcast is not sponsored or endorsed by Scopely, and we did not actually cross paths during our time there. Scopely is one of those companies that's profoundly influential right now, but many consumers don't know who they are because they let their games speak for themselves. Scopely Incorporated is an international video game publisher and developer based in LA with studios around the world. Founded in 2011 to launch casual social games like Dice with Buddies, Scopely began branching out into the licensed IP space in 2015 when they launched Yahtzee with Buddies in partnership with Hasbro. This was foreshadowing for Scopely's future. As Eric describes, they spent their first few years figuring out how to make their games evergreen. In the years that followed, Scopely successfully released licensed mobile games like The Walking Dead: Road to Survival, WWE Champions, and Star Trek Fleet Command. They also branched out into acquisitions, bringing Marvel Strike Force into the fold, which eventually led to my hire. Eric left Scopely in 2018 to go to Google to head up the Stadia team. Scopely was acquired by the Saudi Arabian investment firm Savvy Games Group in 2023, and around that time launched Monopoly Go, which broke the mobile gaming world open by becoming the fastest mobile game to ever gross $3 billion, according to Sensor Tower in 2024. Yes. 3 billion. Many players first became familiar with Scopely when they entered the proverbial chat as the eventual new publisher of Pokemon Go. Another full disclosure, that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity I mentioned was at the Pokemon Company International, which is a weird but true coincidence. And all opinions in this podcast are my own. Today's guest, Eric, played a key role in Scopely's success as he joined early in their history and evolved to become head of user experience for the company. The success of those early titles speaks to strong user experience practice that was likely nurtured by Eric's leadership. And I did see evidence of lasting influence during my time at the company, and the availability of regular user experience research and a general spirit of curiosity across the company.
Loading. Podcast level 10. Transitioning teams from ideation mindset to operations mindset.
Have you had the opportunity to kind of help a team move between one model and the other? So move from the blue sky to the sort of evergreen situation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's interesting, I guess Scopely is another good example because that was explicitly what happened with the company, right? Is like they ship some titles, and then there's this great model where we were able to figure out how to keep people deeply engaged and connecting, and also like I think pairing a lot of that with a known IP, a known brand, a known intellectual property was great because you've got these fandoms and you're going deeper on fandoms. But yeah, we were not in the position where we had a team that we could have like hire different people to do these different things. So people have to be working constantly in these two modalities, right? And you start to shape teams around the stage at which their titles in.
Do you remember one or two of the challenges that people faced as they transitioned from like a production mindset to that operations mindset? Because I know that's something I've seen a couple of times where folks are kind of stuck in one versus the other.
I think there are folks who, and this is kind of more general, right? This applies across multiple things that I've seen at different places. There are people who really just love that 0 to 1, right? And they're really carved out for it. And it may become harder for them to adapt into a more sort of iterative, fine-tuning approach.
Someone figures out they're more drawn to one end of the spectrum or the other, 0 to 1 brainstorming or that operational mindset. Do you think they should specialize or should they cross-train?
I think, take this as my opinion, I think it's valuable to still put them in this other, to afford the experience to have these other modalities of thinking, because I think they actually strengthen each other. And I think there may seem to be like, it's less interesting to think about how you're going to take something that's already been crafted and give it longevity. But I think there are things there that can then you can take back and you can apply to the 0 to 1. And I think it's just, I think it's a really rewarding experience, but it is a different mindset. I think different people have attraction to different parts of the life cycle.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that the two can inform each other. And if you're somebody who's attracted to the early part of the process, maybe viewing it as a temporary dalliance in operations, cross-training so that you get better at creating games that survive longer can make it more palatable if you can't picture a life of 10 years working on the same game that's already been released.
Yeah, I like to help people see that being T-shaped is an asset, no matter what you're going to do or where you're going to be. Learning new things, having that growth mindset, I think ends up strengthening you, even if it's like you said, if it's like a little, if you're just sauntering off the path for a bit to come back.
Loading podcast level 11, artificial intelligence for video game development.
I have to ask about AI. It's at the top of mind for most folks, and artificial intelligence, it's a big term. It gets thrown around a lot. It's very generalized. And I'm curious about everybody's perspective on, is there a role for it in the video game industry and where you see that shaking out?
Yeah. So I love whenever a new hype train comes along, I love to harken back to the ways that it's just not new at all, right? Which I think is, it's fun when we think about, oh, what would AI do in video games? It's like, anybody heard of like non-player characters, or like all these other, you know what I mean? Or like when people are in tech, it's like, yeah, we've been personalization algorithms, like whatever it is. I think it is not everything is new. What is new and what is interesting is there's a bunch of different intelligent robots. That's cool, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about today. But like the generative AI and the act of creation coming from, increasingly so, from non-humans. Like you could argue that tools are already sort of, we're already cyborgs in the digital tools that we use for creativity, but it's accelerating, right? And it's real and it's powerful and it's scary and it's cool and terrible, like all together. And like, all the sci-fi stuff is happening right before our very eyes, so there's like broader cultural, societal implications for this move that are super interesting to think about as a human in this world.
How about the specific role that AI might play for video game development?
But I think like as it applies to games, there's already seeing some really cool stuff. Like to the degree that this can help with the pipelines, fantastic. To the degree that train models on data that afford mechanics that we couldn't have produced at scale previously, like that's super interesting, right? And just from a pragmatic standpoint, the amount of money and hype that's flowing into this stuff. Like we all have to be looking at it, understanding it, taking a point of view about it in the positive and the negative, right? Being part of the dialogue. I think my sense is that like we're in the middle of a hype cycle. Some of the stuff is going to flush out to be really interesting and some of it's not. And really, I look at it as another tool. So I think it's really interesting in some ways. But I think like video games still need people so far.
God, I mean,
just play them if nothing else, right? What are we going to just like for AIs to play? And like, what are we going to do? I don't know. I mean, maybe sports is the thing. Like, we're just going to watch the robots like game against each other. I don't know. Like, I think that I like humans. I think we're around for a while.
Loading. Podcast level 12. The call for AI literacy.
But, you know, in your response, I think is this like AI literacy thing. Yeah. You know, it's incumbent on everybody to discard the AI term, sort of. And there's generative AI. Yeah. But there's like you talk about models and how you're using that. You can potentially use that to help just within a company to process data and make good informed decisions about game design or something like that. That's a different application of AI. You talked about AI for non-player characters, which has been around since like the dawn of time. And so like deconstructing it makes it a little easier for us to process.
Deciding which parts to pay attention to, like I was advocating for literacy, right? But like, oh my gosh, there's people who spend their whole day, like we see them out there on LinkedIn or whatever, like there's people who spend their whole day like just like consuming the tools, which is great. Like I want people to do that, but I think there's a certain amount of noise that's happening that, you know, it's healthy to figure out which parts maybe are interesting or mature and which parts are still evolving and which parts you need to pay attention to, and that can get overwhelming. So
I saw that in voice user experience too, working on early. I mean, and that is itself a form of machine learning or artificial intelligence, if you like to think about it that way. But there's everyone's like voice only, everything's going to go all in this direction, throw everything out. And you're like, well, my Alexa still does 7 of the same things. And I can say that because I worked on it. There's always the hype stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. People still like to hold stuff, I think. And I think people are still going to want to play games, you know?
Yeah.
Loading. Podcast level 13. Evaluating the current state of the video game industry economy.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the video game industry, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Give everybody a job, I guess. I mean,
I like that one.
Right? Like, I mean, that's the tricky thing about the industry right now, is just to see so many amazing, skilled people out of work and wondering what's next for them, right? And like amazing talent out there. And I think it's because of the shifting of various dynamics, you know? So let's empower creative people to be creative and make the world a better place, right? Again, like that's so cheesy. I'm so sorry.
Don't feel bad about being cheesy. I wonder, you know, trying to talk to my students about my poor students last year watched me get laid off in the middle of our class. I was like, it's fine. Everything's fine. And I wonder, I've been trying as a professional to figure out how much of this do we think is truly an economic force and how much of this is preparing for like the console replacement cycle and how much of this is something else, like just a permanent shift in the industry. And I wonder, do you sense any breezes?
I would not encourage any student to write a thesis on what I say about this, right? I think there are market dynamics at play, right? And we see when there are these cultural shifts and new technical hype cycles that people don't understand, things happen like what are happening right now. I do wonder, and this is part AI and part a number of other dynamics I think that are happening, whether we're seeing a shift towards smaller, more nimble teams and studios that can do things. We're definitely seeing a pause in funding and a recalibration of funding, and like a lot of funding going to the hype cycle that will last for a certain period of time. But I think things are going to fall out of that. And there are people who are funding these smaller ventures in gaming. Like there's still such a huge opportunity. So I think it's really hard. I think some of it's market dynamics. I think some of it is sea change that will last. But I do believe that like the hunger for creativity and experience and connectedness that can be games or interactive virtual environments and experiences can afford to people is like, that's not going to go away. And so I think we are seeing some shifts that are going to be durable. But I'm optimistic while also being compassionate to a lot of people who are probably not feeling very optimistic right now.
Loading. Podcast level 14. Pivoting to new opportunities.
I know one of the things I want to get across in my book is you don't have to make a live service game. Like, you really don't. You can make other games and get your point of view across and be successful. Maybe the scale of success isn't exactly the same, but also the scale of risk isn't exactly the same. And that's better right now.
I think so too. And tools, like people, like I know some people are looking into tools, right? Like we are seeing a sea change in terms of who's making content and like embracing this idea that we can enable people to be part of the creative process is another really interesting vector for people who might be interested.
I wonder what, like the blurry line, we've got Fortnite, which is like letting people release entirely in Fortnite. And like, at what point are those fully game developers? And like, do you just... You described an inception scenario basically earlier when you were talking about UGC, like you're creating for people who are creating for people who are creating for people.
Who's a creator, right? Like, I mean, that's what like, you know, both Roblox and VRChat, right? Like it's the delineation between someone's making somebody for something else, someone's consuming it is just like, I don't know if it's ever been true because I've always felt like the act of consuming content or especially playing video games is sort of a creative act. And that's definitely how people think about it. And I think we're seeing those lines become even more blurred.
And to the point you made earlier, sometimes you don't want to go all in on the thing you love. And the beauty of a lot of the systems you've created is it allows people to flex their involvement, create a little bit, do it on the side, and still be a full participant in the industry in that way. So thank you for the work you've done along the way to give more people a creative outlet.
I'm just lucky to shepherd these awesome teams that are doing the hard work.
Loading. Final podcast level. Links and follow-up.
Is there, as we wrap up, is there any place you'd like people to look for you on the vast internet?
You know, I don't I'm pretty focused on my teams and our mission. I'm on LinkedIn out there. I don't post a lot, but yeah, feel free to hit me up there and I'd be happy to chat or help support anybody as needed.
Awesome. I like to ask a follow-up question because in this era of, I don't know if you've noticed this, but we've got bots sending out LinkedIn requests. I wonder what a good LinkedIn engagement looks like for you.
You mean for reaching out to me directly?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think hi is kind of, I don't know like what to do with that necessarily, but hi, I am this human doing this thing that I have this thought that maybe you can help me out or chat about an area. I think that just like very specific and brief is probably the most helpful way to connect. And also just an understanding that, you know, things are busy, things are tough. My first priority is the folks that I'm directly shepherding internal, but I do carve out time for mentorship or hanging out with people who are doing interesting things.
It's something I've seen a lot of people struggle with is like, how do we engage, especially now as the volume increases and people get feedback from career coaches, like just send out 20 requests and see what happens.
It's true. I mean, it's a tough time. Like I will try to make myself available. I'm also very busy. You know, big shout out to you and people like you who can pull hopefully some helpful things out of people to share en masse, because I think that's really valuable what you're doing.
It takes two to tango. And thank you for your time today, Eric. It has been a delight.
Awesome. Same, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed Eric's perspective, don't forget to hear how his insights were featured in context. In the Game Development Strategy Guide, my new book from Rosenfeld Media, Eric is featured alongside 14 other industry experts in a guide that will help people of all experience levels and disciplines level up their game development expertise. Available worldwide from your favorite online bookseller or from my publisher, rosenfeldmedia.com. Enduring Play listeners can get 15% off at rosenfeldmedia.com through November 30th using the code EnduringPlayS1. Join me next time for another conversation with one of the experts featured in my book as we explore what it takes to create video games that don't just survive, but thrive.
Initiating final credits sequence. Podcast. Enduring Play. Created and produced by Cheryl Platts. Copyright Idea Platts, LLC. All rights reserved. Podcast theme composed by Cheryl Platts. To learn more about Cheryl's books, visit rosenfeldmedia.com. Explore the podcast at enduringplay.com. For book and podcast merch, go to ideaplatts.dashery.com. Follow Cheryl on Blue Sky at Funny Godmother. To learn more about Idea Platts, the design education consultancy, visit ideaplatts.com.